Hey, what's up, everybody? So, I'm back again. I told you I wanted to try to get a couple more videos in tonight. Um, this one has to do, it's a great channel. It's called Audit the Audit. And please do not take anything they have to say or anything that I have to say as a way to get out of tickets or, any legality matter. This is just strictly strictly for the intent of more entertainment than anything else, and to really shine light on what some of your main, how can I put it, how much of your freedom you really have, and how cops try to take advantage of that. For instance, I one time had to go to court and testify, and the the judge immediately said, I'll take anybody pleading the Fifth Amendment as a guilt. And I'm thinking to myself, you cannot do that. You're not above, the law. In fact, you're there to represent the law, not sit there and say you'll take any. I mean, it had no effect on me. I could care less, but I just didn't appreciate the way she had said that, especially for how badly the outcome could have, been. But, I always wondered what makes them think they could get away with that. And you often see that a lot with cops getting away with stuff. And I'm not a cop hater. Heck, I wanted, the FBI was my second dream come true job. The only problem is my dad was a prior felon. And I only seen my dad twice a year, if that. And so, I just didn't understand it. I told them, I pleaded with them, I asked them, hey, I don't want, this is just, I don't even see him, that often or whatever, but they weren't having it. So, luckily, I found my first dream job, which was a record label. The FBI was the second. And so, even though that didn't come to fruition, I knew that, this is just, it's crazy because some of the FBI folks, we had a guy here in Colorado a couple of years ago, is carrying his firearm. He's at a dance club, dancing up like a fool, and his gun discharges. Now, imagine having to answer for that, that night from your superiors. Oh my God, that would be awful. But anyways, this is just to bring to light some of the things that happened. And this is actually a really sad but good video. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. If you're new to the channel, hit a like, subscribe, and a notification. I'd greatly appreciate it, guys. So here we go. And I need to put it on the right one. There we go. So again, I hope you guys enjoy it.
Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers use of force, officer obstruction, and official misconduct, and is brought to us by Cameras Everywhere's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. On July 26, 2021, Officer David Lance Dukes of the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety responded to a call regarding a man banging on a townhouse door, allegedly with a gun in his waistband. When he arrived on the scene, Officer Dukes immediately drew his gun and ordered 58-year-old disabled man Clarence Gailyard and his cousin Mario Julian, who were standing in the parking lot outside the townhouse, to the ground.
Hey, let me see your hands! Bert, get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground right here! Get on the ground! You! Burgundy shirt, get on the ground! Over here! On the ground! On the ground! Get on the ground! Do you not listen? Get on the ground!
Mr. Gailyard attempts to comply with Officer Dukes' orders by getting onto his hands and knees, but Officer Dukes forcefully uses his foot to attempt to force Mr. Gailyard all the way to the ground, causing his head to violently hit the pavement. In the 1989 case of Graham versus Connor, the Supreme Court explained that the Fourth Amendment requires a police officer's use of force to be quote-unquote reasonable. Uses his foot.
Get on the ground!
Mr. Gailyard attempts to comply with Officer Dukes' orders by getting onto his hands and knees, but Officer Dukes forcefully uses his foot to attempt to force Mr. Gailyard all the way to the ground, causing his head to violently hit the pavement. In the 1989 case of Graham versus Connor, the Supreme Court explained that the Fourth Amendment requires a police officer's use of force to be quote-unquote reasonable under the circumstances, and identified 3 factors that courts should consider when determining whether an instance of force was reasonable. These factors include, quote, the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, and whether he is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. More recently, in the 2016 case of Armstrong versus Village of Pinehurst, the Fourth Circuit, which includes South Carolina, held that, quote, non-compliance with lawful orders justifies some use of force, but the level of justified force varies based on the risks posed by the resistance. Even purely passive resistance can support the use of some force, but the level of force an individual's resistance will support is dependent on the factual circumstances underlying that resistance. In this situation, the severity of the crime at issue was limited at best, although Officer Dukes claimed to believe that Mr. Gailyard had a gun at the beginning of the interaction. However, at the time Officer Dukes used force against Mr. Gailyard, it was clear that he did not pose an immediate threat, as he had raised both of his empty hands above his head before getting on his hands and knees. Finally, Mr. Gailyard was not resisting arrest in any way. In fact, he was attempting to comply with Officer Dukes' commands when the force was employed. Under these circumstances, it is highly likely that a court would conclude that Officer Dukes' use of force against Mr. Gailyard was neither justified nor reasonable.
Is there a gun back there?
Ain't no gun.
By that truck.
Ain't no gun.
You're not listening, dude. Bro, you got a gun on you, man?
No, I ain't got no gun.
You know, again, I want to kind of point out the fact that I understand the stress of law enforcement, but they knew what they were signing up for. If I knew that, you know, tomorrow I'm going to sign up to be a plumber, well, I could expect to run into some shit every now and then. The same thing with police officers is that, you know, they're not always going to have good days. They're going to have bad days. They're human, just like us. And in fact, I don't know if I ever told the story, but my former best friend, he was like a brother to me. I mean, we were inseparable for like 20-some years and, you know, just kind of had a falling out. But his father was an internal affairs investigator. And, of course, those are the cops that you know, regular cops fear, because those are the ones who are going to run the investigations on you if something bad happened. And so he was cool. He would often, you know, help out where he could, and he was just a totally all-around awesome guy. But then, you know, there was other times where when me and my friend first met, I had said the story about where I went to high school, being a prep school, and it was very small, 500 plus kids. I was one of 3, how can you say, one of 3 minorities, so it didn't make it exactly easy, but, you know, I made the best of it, but I learned firsthand what it's like to experience, like what, you know, these guys are experiencing right now. You know, the constant profiling, the constant looking back at you like you're all, you know, you're up to something no good, and that right there in itself is just that's heartbreaking right there. So
All right, I'm just
ain't no gun.
Turn back over. Hold on, you watch him say?
Wasn't on her vehicle.
He had something.
I ain't on no gun.
The door's unlocked and it's not always shut.
No, he was right here. Watch him. Go watch him. There it is.
I ain't on no gun.
All right, that's what he had. All right, who's the complainant? All right, get him up.
Put your leg up.
25 cents, got one tank.
Alright. Put your leg that way so you
I'm
can stand
good
up.
for you.
Alright, listen, I'm about to help you. Hold on. Alright, ready? 1, 2, 3. Alright.
Yep.
Listen.
Yep, they slammed my head down on the cement. Yep.
Go back inside. Go back in the house. Go back in the house. Ain't nobody talking to you.
I got head drummer.
Go back in the house.
Yep. Y'all bust my head down. Yeah, I've been in an accident. Yep. Y'all bust my head down. You threw me down.
I sure did. You wasn't listening.
Yep. No, it ain't. You ain't to throw me down like that. I'm disability.
Okay.
I got head problem. Yep. You threw me down. Yep. You threw me down. You threw me down. Yep. You bust my head down on the cement. Yep. You bust my head.
Alright, let me tell you what happened.
His forehead.
So, I want to tell you guys 2 stories about law enforcement that I have found extremely odd. I'll start off with the bad. So, the worst one, there's a hospital here in Colorado called St. Anthony's, and it's a huge hospital, and it's brand new, so it's almost looks like a 5-star hotel when you walk inside. Everything's marble and statues and this and that. But it's a very beautiful place. So I had a girlfriend, and you know how a lot of the stair steps could be made out of the gravel, and then they just compress it, and then they just make stair steps of it. Well, she had fallen down a flight of them and broke her ribs. Was all bloodied and bruised up and everything. Had to call the ambulance for her. And as I'm there, at this particular time, my car had gotten stolen. I had a Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8, and it was like 25 days or so that they hadn't found it. And so during that time, I was driving this Chrysler 300C, and I didn't know how. I mean, they're both, Chrysler cars are made from the same company, but I just assumed, the back lights were on. I mean, daytime or stuff and all that. The front lights were on, but I guess the back lights weren't, so says this officer. So he actually is a dick enough to pull me in the parking lot of the St. Anthony's, healthcare facility. He pulls me over in there, and he's with his partner, this female lady, and he orders me out of the car and has me sit on the curb and begins to go through my things in the car without even asking. He didn't have a search warrant. He didn't have anything in there. I don't have anything in there. I didn't have anything to hide. So I'm looking at the lady, kind of dumbfounded, and she's even dumbfounded, why is he going to this extreme? And when I asked him, well, why are you pulling me over? He had no legitimate excuse. He would just totally leave the question be, and yeah, that was that. And that's Jefferson County, Colorado, which is the worst county in Colorado for racism. I don't throw that around a lot just because I'm Hispanic. I don't think everybody's racist, I think that's BS, but teach their own. So when the good times that I did experience with an officer, I had just purchased 2001 SS Camaro, and it was a 35th anniversary edition. And so, just liking to open her up and just freaking take off. I one time was doing that, and I accidentally clipped another driver, and I felt it, but I really wasn't sure. And since we were on the highway, there was no place to go. So I turned off, and that's when I looked at the car, and the car had some damage. And I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't even stop for anything. And so, I called the non-emergency number, and they came by, and I was all visibly shaken and upset, apologetic. And the guy's like, at least you could own up to it, be a man about it. He's like, I'm not going to let this go, without punishment, so throw your fucking keys on the dashboard and just walk away. I was like, wow. And the last one was, right after my marriage dissolved, I was missing my daughter and my dog so much. It killed me not being around them. And I don't drink, but for some reason during that time I was drinking. Probably just trying to forget, drown my sorrows, whatever. And I remember I would drive into areas that, were reminiscent of better days, like where I went to, middle school or this school or that school or, just different areas. And this is when, before my Jeep Grand Cherokee got stolen, because I had it for a while before I got a divorce. I had it for a few months. So, it was all washed, all bright, nice and new. And I have like an idiot a 12-pack of Michelob Ultra sitting right there on the passenger seat with an open one in the container, a little cup holder, and another empty one in the cup holder, and lights come on, and I'm like, oh my God, Jesus Christ, please no. And the cop's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, it's like shaking and shit. He's like, listen, he's like, I know you're drinking. He's like, please, just be safe driving home, whatever you do. He's like, I'd make it, really bad on my conscience if, you were to hurt yourself or others. He's like, but what are you doing around here? And I told him I used to go to school up the street. And he's like, okay. He's like, this is a high traffic area for drugs. Do you have any drugs in your car? I was like, no. And he's like, well, can I search? I was like, absolutely. So they did their search and everything. They came back. He's like, all right, man. He's like, just, make sure that, you don't drink and drive with a container, sitting right there in your cup holder. And so those two things right there were complete miracles. So not all law enforcement are assholes. A lot of them are really down-to-earth, cool people, not just because they let me off the hook or whatever, but I've run into quite a few that are just, yes, they put their lives on the line daily, but they did choose that route. I always say as well. So I just wanted to throw those stories in there. But definitely, I want you guys to pay attention to the sergeants. It's these two individuals right here. And every time he talks, and that's the officer, the arresting officer, just look at their faces.
You put my head down on the cement.
He was in front of the car when I came up. And he was walking like this. And I thought it was a gun at first. I said, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. I had him at gunpoint. And he's over here doing something like this.
You slammed my head.
What he was doing is putting this up behind the tire. So he comes over right here. He got his hands in his pockets. I'm telling him, let me see your hands, let me see your hands, let me see your hands. He wasn't listening. He got like this right here, and we went onto the ground.
Officer Dukes claims that when Mr. Gailyard was walking from behind the white vehicle, he believed that he had a gun and repeatedly told him to drop it. Officer Dukes also alleges that once Mr. Gailyard stepped in front of the vehicle, he had his hands in his pockets and repeatedly ignored requests to show his hands. However, the body cam footage shows that Mr. Gailyard actually had his hands above his head, and that while Officer Dukes repeatedly screamed at Mr. Gailyard to get on the ground, he never asked him to drop a gun or show his hands, likely because Mr. Gailyard's hands were visible throughout the encounter. An incident report filed by Corporal Brandy Smith, who was also on the scene, states that while Mr. Gailyard was walking from the passenger side of the vehicle, he appeared to have his hands in his pockets, but that once he reached the front of the vehicle, he took his hands out of his pockets. Corporal Smith's report also states that Officer Dukes was giving loud verbal commands for Mr. Gailyard to get on the ground, but makes no mention of a gun or any commands to drop a gun or show his hands. It's also important to note that when Officer Dukes was reporting what happened, he did not explain the method he used to take Mr. Gailyard down. Corporal Smith's report claimed that when Mr. Gailyard did not get completely on the ground, Officer Dukes pushed him to the ground by placing his right foot on the middle of Mr. Gailyard's back. However, the incident report filed by Sergeant Aquel Polidor states that Officer Dukes, quote, jumped up and stomped Mr. Gailyard on the back of his neck with his foot. Although it is unclear from the body camera footage whether Officer Dukes' foot landed on Mr. Gailyard's neck or upper back, it is certain that the version of events Officer Dukes explained to his commanding officer did not align with the body camera footage or the reports filed by his colleagues.
That's what happened. Because my forehead,
your head did hit the cement.
Right, because you bust me down on the cement.
Where's the complainant?
You bust my head down on the cement.
Right here?
No,
You bust my head. You bust my head.
Where's the complaint?
I'm trying to get the name of the complainant.
You bust my head.
What are we doing? I guess Sam was going to check him out.
There ain't nothing about here won't press charges on.
Who called?
I'm not sure.
Take him out of cuffs right now. I mean, because that's what we
You're
got.
gonna have to use it force.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Slam my head down.
Dude, I didn't know what his
You
intention
use
was.
the force. You need to upload your camera.
All right.
I kind of love that he tells him you need to upload that camera like right now. Get your ass back to the station and upload that camera, because he knows that. I mean, just watch all the officers around him. They start to kind of alienate him from everybody else.
You use the force. You need to upload your camera.
All right.
The officer did wrong. Slam my head down. Bust my forehead. Damn right. I'm gonna pay me for that shit too.
Mayor, I'm going to take that into evidence of what he had.
What?
Well, I mean, that's the reasons I did what I did. You know what I'm saying? That's where I'm coming from.
No gun or nothing.
Because when he was behind the truck, I couldn't see what he was doing. And I didn't know where
There ain't nothing there.
that went. If it was still in his pockets when he come around that car with his hands in his pockets.
These dogs officer.
No. On camera.
Yeah, a
All
dog
right, that's
stick.
fine.
A dog stick.
So he can come out of cuffs?
Yes. Take him out of handcuffs.
Yeah, he can come out. Oh, Lord.
You want me to check you out?
You mind looking? Hi. Good, how are you? What's going on?
Officer slammed my forehead down in the cement.
Okay.
In the wrong foot.
Did you use consciousness?
Yeah. Listen.
Can I get a card from you?
I don't have one now. We
Okay,
don't have
what's your
they
badge
don't
number?
give us cards.
Okay, what's your badge number?
1059. One now.
So pay close attention to this young lady's face after the officer tells him, "Oh, I don't have a card." In some states, they are supposed to provide you with the information that you ask them for. If they ask for a supervisor on scene, they're supposed to give you a supervisor. If they ask you, for identifying information, for later on court purposes, the officers are supposed to identify themselves. And he completely goes against all of that, and just look at her reaction.
We don't have
What's your
they
badge
don't
number?
give us cards.
Okay, what's your badge number?
1059.
Let me see if I can get my phone. Hold on.
Hold on.
Give us cards.
Can I get a card from you?
I don't have one now. We don't have
What's your
they
badge
don't
number?
give us cards.
Okay, what's your badge number?
1059.
Let me see if I can get my phone. Hold on.
Hold on. We have cards.
I get daddy.
Okay. Thank you.
Go to hospital?
When Mr. Julian asks Officer Dukes for a business card, Officer Dukes claims they are not issued cards by their department. However, Sergeant Poldador immediately corrects Officer Dukes, states that they do have cards, and provides Mr. Julian with the information he requested. If it was concluded that Officer Dukes intentionally lied to Mr. Julian in an attempt to avoid accountability for his actions, it is possible that he could be convicted of 2 common law crimes under South Carolina law: obstruction of justice and official misconduct. In the 1997 case of State versus Lyles Gray, a court of Appeals in South Carolina upheld convictions for both of these offenses against an officer in the Camden Police Department for her conduct during a criminal investigation. The court explained that, quote, under common law obstruction of justice, it is an offense to do any act which prevents, obstructs, impedes, or hinders the administration of justice, and that, quote, misconduct in office occurs when persons in public office fail to properly and faithfully discharge a duty imposed by law. In this situation, the court concluded that the officer obstructed justice and committed misconduct in office by failing to interview witnesses after her daughter was identified as a suspect, obtaining a false arrest warrant for another suspect, and withholding evidence. While Officer Dukes' lie about whether the department issues identification cards did not rise to the same level of misconduct, given the broad definition of both of these offenses, it is still possible that he could be convicted if charged. However, it is important to note that while some states legally require officers to provide ID to citizens upon request, South Carolina law does not place this obligation on officers. Additionally, many police departments have policies requiring that officers identify themselves, but the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety's policy is not publicly available, and it is unclear whether their policy adheres to any form of officer identification guidelines.
Yeah.
Alright. Call me.
Brandon, he can get his stuff off the car.
Dukes, will you say badge number?
1059.
After Mr. Gailyard was treated by EMS, he and Mr. Julian were allowed to leave. 2 days after the incident, Officer Dukes was fired from the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety for violating the department's use of force policies, which, as stated before, are not publicly available. On August 25, 2021, former Officer Dukes was charged with first-degree assault and battery, which could carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. As of the date of this episode, Mr. Gailyard is represented by an attorney, but he has not yet taken any legal action against Officer Dukes or the department. Overall, former Orangeburg Officer Dukes gets an F for physically assaulting Mr. Gailyard for no apparent reason, blatantly lying about the nature of the interaction in his police report, and for making a concerted effort to avoid being held accountable for his ridiculous antics. At no point during this encounter was Mr. Dukes in any danger, and it is clear that his violent actions were motivated by his ego, not officer or civilian safety. There was absolutely no legitimate excuse for shoving Mr. Gailyard's face into the pavement when it was plainly obvious that he was attempting to surrender. And this is exactly the type of conduct that has sparked nationwide unrest regarding members of law enforcement. Mr. Dukes' feeble attempts to explain his actions and manipulate the facts of the encounter only add to his incredulous and insidious behavior, and his conduct was nothing short of unacceptable. I commend the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety for immediately firing Mr. Dukes and pursuing criminal charges against him. And if there were a lower grade than an F, he certainly deserves that. Sergeant Polidor gets an A+ for remaining truthful and objective throughout the encounter, ensuring that Mr. Julian was given the necessary information to follow up on the incident, and for maintaining a calm, collected, and professional attitude throughout the interaction. Although it cannot be proven with any degree of certainty, I suspect that Sergeant Polidor was highly involved in the Orangeburg Department's decision to fire and charge Mr. Dukes, and the testimony that she offered in her incident report likely played a vital role in making certain that he was held accountable for his actions. Officers who witness acts of misconduct are often placed in a position where they must consider whether reporting that misconduct is worth the potential damage to their career that could arise from pursuing accountability for the actions of their colleagues. And it is all too common to see members of law enforcement justify the actions of their peers in any way they can to avoid facing the repercussions of speaking out against them. This notion was on full display in this very interaction when Sergeant Meyer fist-bumped Mr. Dukes for inappropriate use of force without knowing any of the details beyond what Mr. Dukes had told him. I commend Sergeant Polidor for having the courage and conviction to hold Mr. Dukes accountable for his actions, and I sincerely hope that her actions inspire other officers who witness misconduct to come forward and do the same within their department. As for Mr. Gailyard and Mr. Julian, I cannot rightfully issue a grade to individuals whose actions were purely dictated by the conduct of the officers on the scene. Nothing the pair did was uncivil, and the two obeyed all the commands of the officers to the best of their ability without knowing the context of the encounter. It could certainly be argued that both Mr. Gailyard and Mr. Julian were both victims of police misconduct, one by way of physical violence, and the other by an attempt to avoid accountability. It should be noted that Mr. Julian made a legitimate effort to gather then Officer Dukes' personal personnel information, presumably in an effort to file a complaint against him. And I commend him for sensing that Mr. Dukes' actions were unlawful and doing what he could to hold him accountable. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.
So you guys go give Audit the love that they deserve for putting together such cool material. I could watch stuff like this all day. I'm not anti-cop whatsoever. But, you know, those bad seeds that are around, they could really make they can make a mess of things, that's for sure. But yeah, I want to thank you guys for sticking around and watching this. Might try to pop out one more. It's not taking too long tonight. My upload is going a lot faster. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys soon. For new watchers, you know, go ahead and do all the fancy stuff people say. Like, subscribe, have the bell notifications. But until then, you guys have a wonderful evening.